Imagine waking up tomorrow and the price of gas hasn't just gone up, it's doubled. You try to check your banking app, it just spins and spins, won't load. International shipping is totally frozen, and global food supply chains are literally crumbling right in front of us. Today, we're unpacking this terrifying hypothetical scenario in our latest explainer: how a localized military strike in the Middle East could trigger an absolute global systemic collapse. Let's get right into it. Welcome to our deep dive into the hypothetical 2026 US-Israel-Iran conflict. We're going to break down a war that essentially weaponizes the world's most critical choke points. It's a scenario that really exposes just how incredibly fragile our interconnected modern lives actually are. Here's how we'll break this down today. First, Operation Epic Fury begins. Then, severing the global artery, followed by tech hubs under fire. After that, Europe's hybrid proxy war, the macroeconomic shockwave, and finally, the new energy reality. All right, starting with part one, Operation Epic Fury begins. The situation here deteriorates with absolutely terrifying speed. Think about this. In late February 2026, diplomatic talks completely stall out. By February 28th, Operation Epic Fury kicks off with thousands of massive US and Israeli aerial and missile strikes. And then, just days later, on March 5th, the official closure of the Strait of Hormuz is confirmed. It's just a staggering 0 to 60 acceleration from words straight to kinetic weapons. Now, the US and Israel actually aimed for a calibrated air and naval campaign. In military speak, that's a limited war doctrine. The goal was to dismantle infrastructure without getting bogged down in some messy ground occupation. But, as you might guess, the sheer scale of the strikes unleashed a massive, multi-theater response. It's kind of like trying to surgically remove a hornet's nest with a sledgehammer. The blowback was immediate, and it was total chaos. Which brings us to part two, severing the global artery. Facing a massive conventional military imbalance, we're talking an estimated 100-to-1 disadvantage. Iran didn't even try to match American stealth fighters or Israeli missile defenses. Instead, they made a highly calculated shift. They adapted to endure and expand the conflict by leaning heavily into asymmetric warfare. To really wrap our heads around this battlefield, we have to contrast these two completely different approaches. On one side, you have the overwhelming conventional force of the US and Israel, right? They're relying on top-tier technological superiority and unmatched air power. But on the other side, Iran utilizes these highly effective, incredibly disruptive tactics. We're talking signature-agnostic smart mines that just sit dormant on the seafloor until a massive oil tanker happens to pass over them. Add to that low-cost drone swarms designed to completely overwhelm sophisticated defense systems and direct physical assaults on global communication lines. Let's zoom in on the actual focal point of all this disruption, the Strait of Hormuz. Think of the strait like a human body. You've got 20 million barrels of oil passing through there every single day. Those are the arteries carrying the lifeblood of the global economy. But beneath those waters, that's where 7 critical fiber optic cables lie. Those cables are the nervous system that the entire digital world completely relies on. They handle 97% of local internet traffic and vast, critical amounts of global banking data. And disrupting that nervous system creates a catastrophic digital blackout. Severing these undersea cables wouldn't just mean your Netflix buffers. No, it would induce a sudden, silent global stroke. We are literally talking about wiping out financial transfers, completely paralyzing cloud services, and grounding global logistics networks instantly. That translates to billions of dollars in economic loss every single day. Moving on to part three, tech hubs under fire. So the war rapidly metastasizes, and it proves that in 2026, the battlefield isn't just about oil wells or military bases anymore. Data centers and AI processing capabilities, those are now prime strategic military targets. We're witnessing the weaponization of the digital frontier, directly targeting the foundational infrastructure of artificial intelligence itself. In a very rapid tit-for-tat escalation, Israeli strikes crippled Iranian computing centers, specifically targeting Tehran's Sharif University of Technology just to degrade their AI capabilities. In response to that, Iran locked its crosshairs on the UAE's massive American-backed $30 billion Stargate AI hub. And look, this wasn't just a threat to a building. This was a direct threat to the entire global tech economy, sending massive, undeniable shockwaves through regional stock markets and global tech investments. All right, part four, Europe's hybrid proxy war. This right here is where we see the terrifying evolution of state-sponsored chaos. Analysts are calling it franchise terrorism. See, to bypass sophisticated Western intelligence networks, Iran essentially utilized the gig economy for hybrid warfare. They franchised out low-level attacks to European street criminals and teenagers. They'd literally recruit them anonymously through apps like Snapchat for a few thousand euros just to conduct state-sponsored sabotage. Unbelievable, right? We saw this play out in waves. The first wave hit Jewish sites in Belgium and the Netherlands. Then the second wave focused on the UK, including London synagogues. Across 17 coordinated attacks, the goal wasn't actually mass casualties. It was all about firebombings and property damage designed to sow maximum anxiety, tie up domestic security forces, and send a stark psychological warning to Western nations. To make things even more confusing, a shadow proxy group called Hey claimed responsibility. This was deliberately done to create analysis paralysis for Western intelligence agencies. Now for part 5, the macroeconomic shockwave. You might be tempted to compare this to the famous 1973 oil crisis, but that would be a fundamental mistake. Think about it. 1973 was a political embargo. The taps were just turned off. But this 2026 shock, it's uniquely devastating because it involves the kinetic, physical destruction of infrastructure. Plus, while we might be slightly less dependent on fossil fuels today, our modern supply chains are hyper-optimized and totally digitally integrated. We literally have zero structural redundancy to survive a kinetic blockade of a choke point like this. The immediate, visceral fear of this sudden supply deficit pushed the global benchmark for crude oil to a staggering projected $150 per barrel. And let me tell you, when the baseline price of energy doubles overnight, it triggers an inescapable global inflationary spiral that hits everything, from the cost of your groceries to the viability of major multinational corporations. For major importing nations, we're talking about a compound macro shock. It's way beyond just expensive gas. It simultaneously drains foreign reserves, crashes equities, tanks the value of domestic currencies, and spikes inflation all at once. It's essentially an economic perfect storm that strips away decades of growth in just a matter of weeks. Which leads us to our final section, part 6, the new energy reality. This introduces what analysts call the bullwhip effect. Because modern global supply chains are stretched so incredibly tight, a localized disruption amplifies massively as it moves down the line. For example, shutting down liquid natural gas shipments in Hormuz didn't just mean a lack of power. It meant an immediate downstream shortage of global fertilizer. So in an instant, a naval blockade in the Middle East became a direct existential threat to global agricultural output and food security. The world learned a brutal, unforgiving lesson here. This crisis forced a massive acceleration of the green transition, but not just to save the climate. No, it became a matter of pure sovereign survival. Nations realized they had to build strategic reserves, not just for oil, but for fertilizer. They started fast-tracking green hydrogen to decouple from imported Middle Eastern gas, and they poured massive capital into small modular nuclear reactors. Energy independence, practically overnight, became the ultimate national security priority. All of this brings us back to a famous military axiom from Karl von Clausewitz. War is a continuation of politics by other means. It's a stark reminder that this terrifying conflict, with all of its deep, cascading ripple effects across our digital, financial, and physical lives, is ultimately just a brutal, high-stakes negotiation of power. So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought based on the sources we've unpacked today. Has the 2026 conflict permanently broken the trust of our interconnected, globalized world? Have the vulnerabilities exposed by severed cables and blockaded straits forced us into a brand new era, where nations must retreat behind their own borders and just survive alone? Thank you for exploring this explainer with us. Keep questioning the systems that keep our world running, and we'll see you next time.